which is really unusual for us. So appreciate you joining us today. My name is Dallin Schultz. I'm the president at Rev Equity Group. These webinars that we do on a weekly basis are educational based. We don't ever solicit any deals on these calls. It's just for people to come and learn about what it is that we do and how to get involved in apartment investing. Now, we gear these calls more towards somebody that's looking to passively invest and potentially work alongside us, but the information we share is the same stuff that you would need to know if you're looking to do this on your own. So appreciate you joining in today. And we made a minor adjustment a few weeks back. I just want to remind you of, these used to be an hour long. It's a long call, especially this time of the day. A lot of us are in the middle of different jobs. So we've condensed them down to 30-minute calls. So we try to keep the presentation, the information to 15, 20 minutes, and then open up for some Q&A towards the end. And unfortunately, our guest speaker that was going to come in and speak to us today on this topic of deal structure and asset protection had a last minute cancellation. So I'm going to share with you the little bit that I know about this. But before we do that, I think the first thing to note is that none of the information we share on these calls, especially today, should be taken as legal or financial advice. Absolutely consult with an attorney, consult with a CPA. But what I'd like to do today is walk you through just understanding some of the basic structure of how these deals are purchased. That's probably one of the most common questions we get when we're talking to new potential investors is, what does this look like? Like, yes, I know I invest, I give you money to invest, but what does the actual structure look like? So I wanted to take you through a couple examples today. And then towards the end, we can answer any questions you might have. If you have a question during the presentation, just throw it in the chat box. Throw it in the chat box. My team is monitoring that, and I'm keeping an eye on it as well, so we can address it if needed. So what we were going to talk about today is, again, some deal structure and some basic asset protection that's built into the way these deals are structured. One of the biggest mistakes that you can make as an investor is not separating your personal assets with business assets. And people that are newer into this space we'll start with like a single family home, for example. People will buy this home and they'll put it under them and their spouse's name. Here's the thing. If a tenant slips, injures themselves at that property, and that property is under those individual people's name, they now open themselves up and getting caught up in the lawsuit. Because if somebody slips and trips and injures themselves at that property, they're going to sue the property owner. And so if you're the personal owner of that, you're putting your personal assets at risk as well. So this is where the formation, I'd say one of the most common ways to purchase properties is under an LLC. When you purchase it under an LLC, that is an entity that removes you out of it. So if somebody injures themselves and they go to sue you, they're suing the LLC, they're suing the entity, they're not suing you personally. And there's some general rules of thumb in regards to this. Do what feels most comfortable to you and what your attorney counsels on. I've heard create a new LLC for every property. I've also heard create one LLC with $1 million of assets within that LLC. Now that's more so on the single family residential side. What we do at the level of the apartments that we're purchasing, each property has its own LLC. So I'm going to stop trying to use my hands to paint this picture and actually show you guys some images of what I'm talking about. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, what Paul, what screen are you guys seeing right now?
Joint venture.
It's just the plain white.
Yeah.
Okay, just making sure it's not the notes screen. Okay, so when people think of partnering into real estate, this is probably one of the most important aspects, or one of the most common, I should say, that people think of. So you have a property, you create a single purpose entity or an LLC dedicated for that specific property, and then you have two partners. We'll say two people come in. You got one person that's supplying the capital, and then you have another person that's doing the sweat equity, the operations, if you will, the management. So in this simple joint venture structure, as long as both partners are actively involved, it's not necessarily considered a syndication. And where you got to be careful when it comes to raising capital or structuring these syndications, you absolutely 100% need to consult with a securities attorney, because if you're being compensated just for raising capital for a deal, you're violating securities law and you can get yourself into trouble. So again, this is not legal information. This is just some of my basic understanding of how these gone and how these are structured with the conversations I've had. But before you structure anything, absolutely consult with an attorney. So this is a joint venture structure. You got the capital partner, you got the operations. They are the members that make up the single purpose entity, which is an LLC. And then that entity is what purchases the property. So let's say this capital partner is myself and this operations partner is Ram, right? If somebody gets injured at the property level, they're going to sue this LLC. They're not suing me or Ram individually. They're coming at this LLC. So this offers a level of some asset protection for us. And if we have different LLCs with each different property we're purchasing, that keeps the separation between that. As soon as you start commingling all your properties and assets together, that's where you're going to get yourself into trouble. Because any attorney is going to look at that and be like, hey, this is going to be an awesome payday for us and our clients. So that's why you want to make sure you're keeping these as separate as possible. It's a typical joint venture. What we're going to cross over into now is the basic structure of a syndication. And when I use the term syndication, what I'm referring to is the pooling of capital to go into a single asset. So you have the single asset. We'll just say it's a 100-unit property. You create the syndication entity, and this is a non-member managed LLC. And we'll come back to that in just a minute. But the members of this LLC, in the most basic form, you're going to have two classes, right? You're going to have your Class A members, which are your investors, the ones that bring in the capital. And then you're going to have your Class B members, who are the sponsors. These are the people that are, overseeing the asset management, implementing the business plan. They're the ones signing on the loan. They're the ones taking on all the financial risk. So it's a non-member managed LLC. So what happens is the sponsors come over here and they create a management LLC. They create a management LLC. This is typically where the fees are paid to. And that management LLC, if you track it down, again, it's comprised of the sponsors. So the reason this is a non-member managed, because right now, these are your members. So if something happens at the property and they sue the syndication entity, these members could potentially be at risk. Where in this structure with the management LLC, they're the ones managing the syndication entity. So if something goes south, the syndication entity could say, hey, we're just a holding company. This company over here is the one that's actually managing it and calling the shots on things. So this management LLC is going to be the one that's that could potentially be held liable for it. And again, that's going to be made up of your sponsors as well. So again, it can provide a small some levels of asset protection because of the way that is structured. And these could get very complex. Again, this is a quick overview just to give you an idea of a basic understanding of it. And then with this, since you're purchasing a larger asset, there's often a property manager involved as well. Now, this may or may not be involved in the sponsorship team. Some people have their property management in-house, but this is still, even if they do, that property manager is going to be a separate entity. So it could get kind of complex, it could get kind of confusing, but at the end of the day, you're strategically creating entities and placing members in different entities to provide the highest level of asset protection. So you're not commingling assets, funds, personal assets, and everything in with these property purchases. So the next thing I'm going to touch on here is a fund of funds. So that last example I shared with you was if we were all pooling our money together to go into a specific asset. Now the fund of funds model, and that's what Rev focuses on. As you can see, this setup, the structure will generally remain the same. So how does a fund of fund play into this? So if you look over on this left side here under the syndication entity, you have the Class A members. These are your investors. These people might be coming in with 50,000. They might be coming in with 100,000, maybe 250,000. And so they're all good to be listed on the operating agreement. They're going to be a part of this company. So this is where a fund of funds fits into the equation. A fund of funds comes in as a single investor. And there's other ways they could come into the deals, but we're not going to get into that on this call because, again, I want to keep it as simple and basic for educational purposes only. So this fund of funds is going to come in at this level. So you might have an investor at 50,000. Investor 2 is at 100,000. Investor 3 is at 250,000. The fund of fund might be investor number 4, and they might be placing $1 million. So a significant higher amount of investment. And the benefit to that is, as a fund of funds, you have the ability to negotiate with that operator. We have the ability to come into the sponsors and say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Sponsor, all your other investors are coming in at 50,000 and 100,000. We like the deal. We want to invest in it. We're willing to put $1 million, $2 million into it, but we want a little bit of a better return because we're putting in more capital. So when you have more capital to place, you have much more leverage, especially when you have quick access to it. And I see that Ethan Gao is on our call, and Ethan Gao has freaking mastered this with one of his ways that he gets involved. It's not through a fund of funds, but he still is able to negotiate profitable returns and splits with operators because of his strategy. So it's fascinating. So Ethan, I hope that was okay calling you out. I'm not going to get into details because that's your own thing, but the point is when you have a large amount of capital that you could place into other deals, it gives you more negotiating power. It gives you a higher probability of negotiating a higher return that's going to flow into it. So we have the fund of funds. What does that structure look like? This fund of funds is an LLC. It's an LLC, just like the syndication entity, that's made up of Class A members and Class B members. And so the Class B members, the sponsors, that would be, in this example with Rev, that would be myself and my team. And then the Class A members, the investors, are those people that choose to participate with us. And again, at this level, there's still a manager of the fund of funds. And that's what Rev Equity Group is. I mean, we got our logo here behind me. Rev Equity Group is an asset manager. Rev Equity Group doesn't own any real estate. It doesn't own any real estate. It manages the entities that own real estate. And by doing so, provides that higher level of asset protection to us and our investors. So as you could see, we already had some asset protection worked into the syndication model up here. And as it flows in, it just pretty much mirrors what's happening here even further. So you have even more layers of some protection that can be worked into the model. So again, very basic structure. You're welcome to take pictures of this if you'd like. If you were to Google structures online, you're going to see different models because there's not one right way to necessarily structure these. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so why a fund of funds, right? And this is something that I feel like sets us apart at Rev. And so I just want to introduce this. I've shared this slide before, but now that you kind of understand the structure, what's truly the benefit of a fund of funds outside of just asset protection? So this is what I consider a good, better, and best scenario. 3 different scenarios, 3 different ways people can get started investing in real estate. So scenario number 1, the most common way people get started in real estate is by purchasing a single family home. A lot of people have owned a home previously. They bought their first home. They already went through that process. And so they go that route because it's comfortable and it's familiar. Now, just so we're clear, I don't think that this is a bad approach. I think getting into real estate can be a very good approach. And it's not a get rich quick, it's a get rich for sure. It takes time to build wealth through real estate, but you have a lot more control and it could be a little bit more predictable than maybe some other investment vehicles. So this is a solo route. People will usually get into a dozen homes on their own, maybe even more, just by buying, refinancing, getting in, that whole strategy. I think it's a good model. With what I've learned when it comes to apartments and getting into larger assets, I believe that there's a better model. And this is what I'm going to refer to as the syndication model. So in this model, you still have yourself here. Let's say you throw the same $100,000 into a fund. You throw it into a group of people where you pool all your money together. And now you're not just dealing with $100,000, you have $10 million to work with. And you do that and put it into a large apartment building. So what? Why is this something that somebody might want to consider? Over here, you own this property. It's yours. You have control. You have say. I get that. And that's why a lot of people go this route. With the syndication, though, think about this. You own this home. You have control of it. You got one tenant in there. They move out. You're now 100% vacant. And it might take you a month or two to fill it back up. So during that time, who's paying for that mortgage? Who's paying for any costs associated with it? The tenant's not paying for it because you don't have a tenant there. Where in the syndication model, by pooling that money together, you're able to buy a larger asset that has more economies of scale. If you buy a 100-unit apartment building and 10 people move out, you're still 90% occupied. So who's paying the mortgage? Who's covering the expenses? It's the other tenants that are living there. And this term, economies of scale, refers to the more you buy of something, the more efficient it becomes. It becomes more efficient and less per unit to operate. And that's what's happening here by pooling money together to go into an asset. So this is referred to as syndication. As I said, I believe this is a better model. And we've done these. We've done these as a team. And we've invested into some of these personally. So I still think it's a great model, but especially with the market shifting and some of the uncertainty, there still absolutely is opportunity all around us in the real estate space. There very much so is. But as a team, how do we go about providing a higher level of diversification to investors? And this is where the fund of fund models comes into play. So same situation, right? We have an investor, rather than putting 100,000 into their own home, or into a syndication, which is still going into a single asset, they still pool their money together with other investors. But rather than that 10 million going into one deal, it gets split up. Now you're putting 1, 2, 3 million into multiple deals in multiple markets with multiple high operating, highly effective operators. So think about this for a minute. Florida just got hit by a hurricane 6 months ago or so. My grandfather had 12 single family homes out there as rentals that fortunately didn't get wiped out. There was some damage that he was able to repair, but imagine if you did a syndication and that one apartment building was there in the Fort Myers, Cape Coral area where that hurricane hit. Yes, there's insurance, but your cash flow is going to get hit pretty dang hard. Now, let's assume you invested into a fund of funds model, and let's say this asset right here was the one in Florida, but you had multiple assets spread out in various states, maybe some in Texas, maybe some in Arizona, maybe some in the Carolinas. Even though that one asset in Florida still got hit, you're still going to have other properties helping to cover the cash flow and the expenses. So this fund of fund models just offers a higher level of diversification that you just can't experience anywhere else. And that's why as a team, we've decided to go this route, because especially in this time, we're in the business of growing and preserving people's wealth. And when we took a step back and said, okay, what's the best situation? What's the best vehicle? What's the best thing we can do to still accomplish that in this time? This was our answer to it. So again, this is what we would consider the best model. Yes, this is what we do, but it doesn't make sense for everyone. In fact, I talked to somebody the other day and he says, hey, I love the model. I love what you're doing, but we're really interested in just getting into a single asset in Phoenix. And I said, I can respect that. Here's somebody you should contact. And the person I referred him to is actually somebody we partner with the fund of fund, right? So it could be very collaborative, and different investors have different investment goals and different criteria. So with that being said, that's what I've got for the presentation today. So again, just wanted to briefly touch on some basic asset protection, as well as why the fund of fund model exists and why we choose to focus on it. So with that being said, I'm sure there's probably some questions. I may or may not be able to answer all of them because they might be more attorney related questions. And if that's the case, I will suggest that. And just know that we're going to do this call again, and we're going to have the attorney on the call as well. But what I'd like to do for the next couple minutes here is just open it up to some Q&A if there's any.
Yeah, Dalton, thanks for the presentation. This may be something you can answer. Let's say the fund to fund. Let's say if I invest $100,000 into that fund to fund, do I choose what properties that I would like to send my money into, or you guys take and split that thing among different properties?
Excellent question, Ram. In a fund of fund model, that's one of you can view it as a pro or con depending on how you look at it. The properties are not identified before that money is invested. So what will happen in the fund of fund model, the team will say, hey, these are the types of properties that we've closed on in the past, and these are the types of properties that we will be investing in. And this is how we vet the operator, this is how we vet the market, and this is how we vet the deals. So to answer your question, Ram, you don't choose what property that investment goes into, and it doesn't go into a property. If it's a fund of fund model, it comes into the fund and it gets divided up amongst all the properties that that fund chooses to participate in. Now, with that being said, if I was investing into this, I would want to know where my capital was going as well. So what we do at Rev and at this level is when we choose to participate in a deal, we inform our investors and we say, hey, here's the deal that we're participating in with this group, and this is why. And we'll basically provide a, I don't even want to call it a pitch deck, because we're not pitching the deal. We're just saying, hey, this is the deal we're getting involved in, and this is why. So at the fund of fund level, it requires a high level of trust with that operator or with that management team, and just knowing that their track record and how they vet the operator, the market, and the deal, and just going and trusting that, hey, they are going to do what's best for my capital.
So that $100,000 is going into the first available property.
It depends when you come in on the deal. It depends when you come in onto the fund. So if we say it's say you're raising $5 million and you raise that within a couple weeks, and you've got 5 different deals identified, you're just going to put $1 million into 5 different deals. That could be part of the strategy. So it's not to say that 100,000 is going to go into that first deal. It just really depends on when the capital is raised and when the deals are presented.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm getting there. Yeah. What I'm trying to find out, let's have somebody bring in $100,000 into that fund, right? And let's say you identify one property. So that 100% of that 100,000 is going into that particular asset, because at that moment you only have one property identified, not 7.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yes, if that was the scenario, then that investor capital at that time would be going into that asset. And then as more capital is brought into the fund, more assets are being purchased. So we don't track it though, like, hey, Ram's 100,000 is in this one asset. We treat it as a company fund. We treat it as a pool. So at the end of the day, once the fund is completed and it's involved in multiple assets, each one of those properties is going to be producing cash flow that's coming into that fund. So once it comes into the fund, it then gets diversified to the investors based on their ownership interest.
Okay. Just a little expansion to that. Let's say you're required to put maybe $5 million into an asset, and the fund has only $5 million. So all that $5 million is going into that particular asset.
And we wouldn't do that, because the whole point of the fund is diversification. So if I was going to raise $5 million and put $5 million into an asset, then we would just do a syndication. The whole point of the fund is the diversification. And that's where as managers, we would say, hey, we've got $10 million. We've got 5 or 6 deals in front of us. How much do we want to allocate to each deal? So somebody's investment will not be tied up just in one deal with the fund of fund model. And in fact, our legal documents state that we can't do that, because the whole point is offering the diversification. So if we're not diversifying the investor's capital, we can get in trouble for that, because now we're misleading people. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's more clear now.
Yeah. Great questions. Great questions, Ram. Appreciate those.
And Ram, just to bounce off what Dallin said, is with our fund, we are waiting until we have a certain amount inside of the fund before we do any deployment of that capital, just so that we do make sure that we are diversifying.
Okay, thank you.
Great questions. Do we looks like there's something. Oh, just a comment. Any other questions regarding this? It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's
so
a lot of
just
information.
one comment here. So you guys are looking both into syndication and funds to fund, right? Both you're working at both type of scenarios.
We're not currently. Nope. Previously, we've done syndications, but we're moving into this fund of fund models because it's just,
Okay.
yeah, it's what makes sense to us and to our current investor base. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, we'll leave it at that. And just so you know, we do got some exciting things coming up here in the near future. If you're not in our investor portal, we invite you to do that. It takes 30 seconds to create a free account. It's absolutely not a commitment to work with us, but that's part of our process to determine who's aligned with what we're trying to accomplish. And the very first thing we would do is jump on a quick discovery call just to find out if what we offer is even aligned with what you're looking for as an investor. So if that's something that you're interested in, the link was just put into the chat box. Go ahead and click on that. Take 30 seconds to set it up, and either myself or another person on our team will reach out to schedule that initial call just to see if it's a good fit. And if it's not, we'll refer you to another group, just like I shared with that other investor we talked to the other day. He said, "Hey, Dallin, I like what you guys are doing, but we want a specific property in Phoenix." And I said, "Absolutely, connect with this operator, somebody that I know, like, and trust." So if nothing else, we can help point you in the right direction. And again, for Thursday morning, appreciate you all jumping on and tuning in. Hopefully this was helpful and at least gave you some ideas and direction on what to look into a little bit further as you work on figuring out your investment strategy for these upcoming years. So again, appreciate all of your time, and we'll catch you next week on another Rev Real Estate Live. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.